YouTubers, this is Joe from ArtAlienTV. Another quick game of interplanetary I Spy going on here. Back to Mars, back to Gale Crater, and this is an old image from Sol 748 from the Curiosity Rover. And we have this large rock here and some interesting little things down here. This is going to be a real quick one today because all the things are in the same image here. So we don't have to look very far to see what's here. It's not all spread out in a huge gigaplan. This set of images, incidentally, is quite small. There's only a few in this set. It looks like some of them have been removed for some reason, perhaps. I'm just going to quickly show you the images raw first before we look at the actual things I've found. We've got this one here. This is the main image. And we've got this large rock near the middle. We have what seems to be a bird skull here, just here, with a curved beak, possibly an aquatic bird, like a moorhen or something like that, that type of bird. I'm not saying it is a moorhen, but it has that sort of curve to it, to the beak. So this would have fed in the lake, possibly swam around in the lake like a duck, and would have fed on things in the lake, okay, or around it. And weirdly enough, right next to it here, there seems to be the remains of a dog or something similar. And you can actually see in the raw image here. Now these raw images are a bit poor. I'm just going to show you very quickly in a minute how to clean them up. I've done this many times before, but I know a lot of you are interested in downloading these images and actually looking at them really closely yourselves. I'm just going to show you some really simple techniques how to clean them up to make them easier to look at and take clips from. There's not a lot really you can go wrong with this image, because what's really interesting about this is you've got multiple things all together in one spot. And we've got the bird here, just here, and we've got the dog there. Now, if there are birds and dogs, what else is there? Probably everything. I have shown many different types of animals on the surface, remains of lizards, snakes, dogs, cats, small little bears, birds, all sorts. It's all there. And Gale Crater was an oasis at one point, and animals would have gone there to drink water. So that's a fact. And I have shown hundreds and hundreds of animal remains in this area over the last 7 or 8 years, but nearly 8 years now. And I've been showing them on my other sites for years before that as well, on my websites and stuff. So there's no doubt in my mind whatsoever about there being animals on Mars, at least in the past. There isn't much evidence for living ones now, although there do seem to be insects and birds flying around. And if there are insects and birds flying around, then there are probably animals on the ground. Just because we're seeing lots of remains of creatures that once lived on Mars doesn't mean there aren't any now. In fact, there probably are. So let's crack on with it anyway. The bird is fairly straightforward. You can see that's a bird. You've got the eye here and the beak here. If I go in close, we'll look at it a bit closer. Here we are. The eye's pretty clear. And as I said before, the eye detail gets preserved in these mainly because of the bicarbonate minerals in the lake bed here. This sand and sediment is very salty and has lots of bicarb minerals in it. And it's very sulfuric as well, lots of sulfates and very good preservatives, okay? So some of these things may be very old indeed and have become calcified in these minerals and salts and have basically turned to stone. They've actually petrified. I mean, what can you say about that? It's a beak and a rather interesting shaped head which comes around like that, which is symmetrical there, and there's the beak. Comes around like that. I mean, pretty simple really. There we are. This is really small, by the way. This is only about 1 to 2 inches, possibly a bit more, but I would say 2 or less inches. This is tiny, okay? Really small. It's right up near the rover, but it still looks small on the ground. So this is really small. Things are generally about 1/3 of the size that you think they might be in the image, because the rover camera, the mass cam, is about 7 feet off the ground. So your brain tries to overcompensate and assume that it's being taken from your body height looking down, but it's not. And this is very confusing, and often people get the measurements wrong. So generally things are a lot smaller than you think they are. So if that's only 2 inches, this thing here is only about 3 across. This dog. Zoom into that. You can see we've got 3 teeth here. 1, 2, 3, and there's lots of detail around the mouth. There seem to be teeth here as well, like that. Okay. So we've got multiple teeth. So this is not just a rock. Rocks do not have mouths with teeth, rows of teeth, as I've said 100 times before. We've got a little bit of eye detail here and here, but not a lot. We seem to have some sort of detail here which may represent some sort of ear or something, but it's not very clear. This looks like it's eroded and partly split off here. Some of the calcified remains here have split away. A lot of these are damaged. We also have this rather strange thing here which looks a bit like a face. Whether this is just a coincidence, I don't know. But this thing here is absolutely mental. I've got another enhancement of it here, where I've enhanced the whole thing. And you can probably see it a bit more clearly here. There's the bird. In fact, the bird looks clearer in this image, because I've done it a bit bigger. So it's all there. It's all right there in one little spot. And these things are literally only inches away from each other. We also have this rather weird thing here, which looks like it's got a nose with nostrils and a mouth with an eye here and an eye here. I don't know what it's supposed to represent. It may just be an optical trick, but a lot of these things seem to have eyes, noses and mouths, and they don't always make a lot of visual sense because they're damaged, half-eaten, some of them, and preserved and eroded as well. Wind erosion can do lots of strange things to calcified animals, and you get weird kind of patterns going across them and stuff, where the wind's kind of blown across it for thousands or even millions of years. And there's also this thing up here, which I didn't initially notice. There's a little, what looks like a head here, with an eye here, an eye here, and a nose like that. And the sort of face is outlined as if it's wearing some kind of helmet or something. It's really strange. This is tiny. It may be part of a burial figurine. There are hundreds in the area that I've shown, burial figures and statues and stuff like that as well. So we often get, in these images, we often get a mixture of artifacts, which are, some of them are carved, some of these are fossilized, calcified and fossilized and petrified remains, like these two. And then we get these weird things like this, which may be part of a statue or something. Who knows what that is? But it does seem, if you zoom in, to have an eye here, an eye here. You've got nostrils here, one there, and one there, right? And a mouth with some sort of teeth detail here. Very strange. It doesn't make a lot of visual sense, but some of the stuff doesn't, and we shouldn't expect it to, because this is an alien planet, and we don't fully understand what went on. I'm getting a very good idea of what went on there, and other people are as well, from these images, that there was a cataclysm, there was a nuclear war on Mars as well, but we don't know in which order these things happened. Okay, although a large explosion, massive green explosion, was seen in 1941 by Clyde Tombaugh, as I mentioned back in 2015 in my first video, Mars Explosion. I'll put a link to that at the end of this video. So there was a war, and there was probably lots of other things going on as well, like Olympus Mons probably went off once or twice, which would have destroyed large parts of the atmosphere. It's so enormous. It's something like 3 times the height of Everest, and the size of Wales or something. No, the size of Greater London, I think it is. It's huge. It's about 50 miles, 50 or 60 miles across. It's massive. So when that went off, it would have caused a great deal of damage, and a lot of the things on the ground would have been preserved in volcanic ash, which would have probably stuck to them, cooked them, and then they would have freeze-dried in the freezing atmosphere, as the atmosphere was destroyed by the Great Explosion, or explosions, I should say. So a lot of these things were probably frozen, blast frozen, and then calcified in the minerals that are on the ground. And then gradually petrified into stone, or what looks like stone. I would imagine if you chipped away at these, just under this crust would be organic material, or basically flesh and bone under there, okay? It may not be in very good condition, but it'll be there. Much like the preserved people and animals at Pompeii, okay? So there we have it. So we got 4 things here. We got this weird face thing, we got a bird, we got a dog, and we got another, what looks like a head here, which is really, really nice actually. Let's go a bit closer with that. Let's see if we can get some detail. This is tiny. This is only a half an inch across or something. It's absolutely tiny. You can see a nose, an eye, and the upper lip there. Unfortunately, we can't see all of it, but it's a perfect sort of rounded shape. That rounded shape is really nice. And I've only really noticed it after I enhanced the whole image and spotted what else was here first. So there we are. So there's a whole bunch of things in one little spot there. Now, I'll just quickly show you, for those who are interested, how to treat these images. There are 2 raw images to look at. The one that you want to mainly is this one with the big rock in the middle. And we've got the bird and the dog and stuff there, just below it. But there's some weird stuff next to it as well. And some of this other stuff may be related, and there may be other animal parts or half-buried animals calcified in the ground as well, in the sedimentary layers of sticky sulfate soil. We've got some weird stuff up here, but when you zoom in, these images get really poor because they've been compressed and downgraded. Now, the thing to do with that is to blur them. This is what I always do. I go to blur, and I use a Gaussian blur. You can use other types of blur if you wish, but only a small amount. I use 0.6, and that instantly gets rid of all the distortion from the compression when the image was downgraded. And then what I do, so now you can actually see this stuff quite clearly. There's still a bit of distortion in there, but you don't want to get rid of all of it, because if you do that, you'll also lose some of the textures. So if you over blur, you'll make it worse. If you under blur, it's better to slightly under blur than over blur, I would say. There's still a tiny bit of distortion in here, but you can actually zoom in now and look at this stuff. This looks like it might be part of a creature also here. This thing. This looks like a skull with eye sockets and a kind of beaky kind of nose there. Maybe not, don't know. I'll take clips of these in a minute and show you them. But in this image, this is taken from further back, and this is so tiny, this bird thing, you wouldn't even notice it. It's only because we got another image, just here, with a closer up view, that we actually even got to see this properly. Luckily, the rover took a close-up of this large rock, and the things are right next to it. So we never would have seen that if the rover hadn't zoomed the camera in a little bit further and given us an effective view range of about an extra 3 or 4 feet closer. Okay, so these are tiny. This is about 2 inches. This is about 3 or 4. This rock here is probably about 10 inches across. It's not very big. That's how I do it. Basically, a little bit of blur goes an awful long way with these images, because basically they are pretty grungy when you zoom in. They're not really designed to be zoomed in. They don't want you to zoom in. This is partly why they do it. And this is why they have an orange filter on. The orange filter is there to hide any greenery and growth, which there is on Mars. Stuff like grass and moss and stuff like that. And this thing does look like an animal here, this thing here. So I'm going to take some extra clips for you and put those in a minute. So like I said, a little bit of blur goes a long way, but make sure you go right in close and just make sure you don't blur it too much and ruin the detail. The right amount is crucial. You can try using a field blur, a tiny amount of field blur. That might do it as well. It really depends on what software you've got. I'm using PaintShop Pro 9, which is free. And if you've got my app, or download my app, there's a link to a free download of it for you. Okay, and it's perfectly cool. And this does everything and is uncomplicated. This program, it's not as sophisticated as some of the others out there, the well-known ones, but it's much quicker to use and simpler, and it does all the basic things you need, just like a bit of blur, enlarging, contrast, that kind of thing. You can crop images, add text, It's pretty basic, but it's good. And I've been using it for years now, and I swear by it because it's so much quicker to use than some of the more complex ones. Okay, so just because something's more complicated doesn't mean it's better. Now, if you're new to this channel, please come along to my backup channel, which is called Space Detective 1. Okay, this is really cool. I'm trying to get over 5,000 subs on here. I'm up to 4.35 now. So please come along to that. You'll find lots of videos here that you may not have seen from 1 or 2 years ago, or a couple of years ago, that didn't do so well on my main channel and were ignored. And sometimes they do a lot better on this one for some reason. So come along and see some of these things like the golden statue and stuff like that. That's doing really well, that one, the golden statue video. And also, I've just started a new channel on this new platform, which is called 4B Tube, which is basically a new version of YouTube without any censorship or any restrictions or anything. It's a slightly simplified version of YouTube, and it was started very recently, only a few days ago, by a friend of mine called Billy Carson from Florida in the US, who's a well-known sort of guy who does Ancient Aliens type stuff and is an entrepreneur and very clever chap. It's only been going a couple of days. I've got a few videos on here, but they're not all live yet. I've got 1 subscriber, so please come along and take a look at 4B Tube. And if you're a creator, come along and post your videos up for free. And let's get this thing rolling, because we need alternatives to YouTube that are run fairly for everybody, okay? So check it out, 4B Tube, right? I'll put a link to it in the description and in the comments below, so you can check it out. But it's basically called 4btube.com. It's really simple just to type in. So check that out. Check out my Space Detective 1 backup channel. That's also going quite well. And thanks for watching, everybody. Clips coming up now.